Okay, so hi everyone, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today for our webinar on RPA, how to buy it. This is a 1-hour webinar session on RPA capabilities at DOL and GSA TTS, hosted by the AI and Data Analytics Working Group, RPA project team at ATARC. Our panelists are going to be sharing their presentations on the topic, and we'll be taking live audience questions throughout. So please ask your questions in the Q&A section of this platform, and we'll get to them kind of throughout the presentation. I'm now going to hand it over to our moderator for the webinar, Emerging Technology Lead at DOL, Krista Kennard. Krista, go ahead.
Thanks, Nicole. And thank you everyone for attending. I'm very happy to be here with you all, and I think you're really going to enjoy what Michelle and Ryan have to say. So when I was initially approached by the working group to talk about RPA at DOL, I said, this is great, because I actually think that the Department of Labor has a really great story to tell around RPA. And I've actually kind of been a part of this story from its inception. So just for full transparency, and actually this is why I'm excited to be the moderator, I used to work for GSA Centers of Excellence, and I was one of the directors for artificial intelligence and automation. And I actually was partnered with the Department of Labor to help build out their capability. And in fact, I got so involved and so entrenched in the process and really just fell in love with the program and what they were doing that I decided to join DOL to lead emerging technology for the organization. So I have seen both sides of this coin, and I actually think that both sides of the story, the GSA side of the story and the DOL side of the story, are really critical to the success that we've been able to see over the last year and a half at DOL regarding RPA. So I'm so excited that we have Michelle McNellis, who is the Director of Acquisition at the GSA Centers of Excellence, here today to talk about her perspective and her experience through the Centers of Excellence. And we are also joined by Ryan Chandler, who is the Senior Director of Strategy and Administration for the Office of the Senior Procurement Executive here at the Department of Labor. So Ryan, I'm so excited to hear what Ryan has to say, because he actually is the owner of our initial foray into bots. So it was his team who raised their hand to be the very brave pioneers to say, you know what, this is a technology that I think is going to be really valuable. Even though we don't necessarily have it fully solved at the Department of Labor, let's try it out in our organization. So Ryan and his boss, Carl Campbell, the Chief Procurement Officer at DOL, and really their teams deserve a huge round of applause for raising their hand to go first on this. I think we've learned a lot from this endeavor, and I think that it's only going to drive RPA as a capability going forward. So just to prime you all for what we're going to do today, this is really going to be more of kind of a fireside chat. So you're not going to see necessarily slides. We will do a small demo, but this is really designed to be a conversation. We're going to start with Michelle, and we're going to hear about the Centers of Excellence experience. I've got a number of questions for her. Then I will open it up for questions specifically for Michelle and the kind of the content that she has presented. We'll do that for about 10 minutes. So as she's speaking, please feel free to put your questions for her in the chat. I will get to them after we finish up our time. And then we'll transition and we'll talk to Ryan and hear more of the DOL perspective. And then again, at the end, we will open up for questions for Ryan specifically, but also more broadly. And I'm also happy to represent DOL to talk about some of our enterprise capability going forward. So with that, Michelle, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Krista, for having me. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the introduction. Like Krista said, I am the Director of Acquisitions for Centers of Excellence, which is housed within TTS at GSA. So excited to answer any questions that you might have, Krista.
Yeah, so I used to get this question a lot when I worked for the COE. Can you just kind of give us a high-level explanation of what are the Centers of Excellence and kind of what is their mission and how do they support the various agencies that you work with?
Sure. Yes. It's one of those things that I feel like is, I don't want to say it's unique, but when you're part of a large agency like GSA, you can kind of, people are like, well, GSA focuses on buildings and they focus on acquisitions. So what is Centers of Excellence actually doing? At COE, specifically under the TTS umbrella, TTS is the Technology Transformation Services. So we are here to help agencies modernize their IT. So our mission at COE specifically states that we are here to modernize IT, how to get involved with those agencies and try to figure out specifically how to problem solve with them at the enterprise level. We focus our areas of efforts on specific groups such as like cloud adoption, data analytics, artificial intelligence, contact center, customer experience, change management, and infrastructure optimization. So we try to focus our efforts at a large scale. Most of our partners are partnered with the CIOs or like the CIO's office so that we could figure out enterprise-wide solutions to the problems that they're facing. COE does this in a way like a Fed-to-Fed experience. So it's more of a consulting service that is provided from our technologists to that agency, because most of the time, as we all know in government, it's quite difficult to have and to hire technologists in your organization. It's quite difficult and it's hard to be competitive. And so COE offers that Fed-to-Fed experience. And what we try to do is implement best practices across what we've learned from not only bringing our subject matter experts from industry into government, and then bringing that into each agency, but also implement like agency best practices, like acquisition best practices, or how do we set up agreements or things like that. So it's a matter of finding those I hate using the words like breaking down the barriers, but the reality is we're really trying to break down the barriers so that we are finding a solution to their IT issues. And it could be numerous things, like specifically here at the DOL project was DOL came to us and said, we want to build a bot. We need a technologist. How do y'all do this? And we had the people to do it and the expertise. And so that's kind of how our partnership started.
Yeah, great. And so I think that you touched on a couple really important things there. One, just having kind of the technical expertise to be able to do this. But I think that all of us working in the government space know that a lot of the technical work that happens in government is going to happen with the support of contractors, right? So you are director of acquisition. Can you talk a little bit about, I think at a general level, but also maybe a little bit about how this worked with the specific DOL project? How exactly do you support agencies with acquisition, specifically around technology? And I think this audience would be most interested in, how do you support around buying RPA services and products?
Sure, that's a great point that I didn't mention before. Is part of our I don't want to say our niche type of mission at COE is our partnership with industry. Is like we not only bring the people in-house to make them beds, we also partner with industry, as Krista alluded to. So what that means is that we try to find ways to bring in industry into the government to work with us that are either emerging technologies or things that people aren't used to buying, and make them a little bit easier for folks. At DOL specifically, they did the buy when it came to the RPA factor of doing the actual buying for the RPA need. But the thing is like when we're doing any type of buy or when we're doing any type of procurement, when it comes to any type of buy, even if it's technology or construction or whatever it would be, the most important piece is focusing in on the cross functionality of your team and making sure that you have individuals on your team that are part of all different groups within your agency. Especially, I would say, especially with an emerging technology, because let's say you're buying something new, like an RPA or an artificial intelligence type of service or product from an industry partner, you need to understand what are the complications, limitations, policies that might be hindering you or helping you with this buy. So bringing in those subject matter experts from your CIO, your OGC, your contracting SPs, understanding exactly and specifically what is possible with the buy is going to be so important. For instance, if I'm the RPA thing is a perfect example, and I know Krista, you can speak to this a little bit more. But the thing is like, let's say we wanted to incorporate that buy into our environment. How do you get the ATO? How's your industry partner going to support you with that? The technologist that is helping you write the requirements should be able to address that potentially not only in the requirements itself, but also in the post award while they're engaging with the industry. Other thing is data rights, things that, how do you ensure that the government is going to own the data that is then incorporated into this technology? That is where your OGC comes to play. Understanding what the government's going to own, understanding how your data rights are going to have a play here is so important. So that cross functionality of your team is imperative for success. I, as a contracting officer, can only do so much. I understand the FAR, I understand regulations and policies that are associated with contracting. So I know how to make a optimistic opportunity into a pragmatic solution when it comes to contracting, but I need those technologists to tell me what is it truly the problem that you're trying to solve. So what we do is we take that problem, figure out how the users want to, what is that problem really solving with the users, taking them into consideration, working that into our requirements, and then going through the process like that. And I know, Krista, I know you and I talked about this, and one of the things, like specifically at DOL, was the buying itself and how you all did it. And I think that would be really, I know you're asking me the questions, but it'd be really helpful for the audience to understand how the buy went down at DOL.
Yeah, so I can speak to that a little bit, and you're 100% right. That cross functionality of the team is super important. And so the role that I filled on that, right, and the COE was able to support was, I know RPA very well, right? I am a technologist by training. I know everything from soup to nuts, what needs to happen to do a successful RPA implementation. I am not an acquisition professional. I can barely spell FAR, yet alone understand all of the documents that are in it. And actually, working with Ryan's team has been incredible. Every time I interacted with contracting officers and cores and contracting specialists, my mind was blown with like the amount of information that procurement professionals just have to keep in their brain about the federal acquisition and how it works. So I partnered with their acquisition team, actually, and we were the ones who sat down, and I was that technical SME to say, this is what we need. These are the things that we need to make sure we have to solve these challenges that you're trying to solve from a technical perspective. And then their acquisition team was able to pull together what the required acquisition documents were needed to be able to compete it and get the appropriate vendors on board. So that's how that worked. And again, I think that's one of the benefits of having the COE, right? Is we have that technical expertise to make sure that when you leverage your contracting teams, right, you're getting to the root of the problem so that you can solve it.
Yeah, and that's totally true. And one of the pieces is understanding like some of the outcomes. Like as a contracting person, I might not know specifically how industry is pricing something and how best to buy that thing from them, because it might not be something I know that we would need in the future. So understanding like the pricing structure and the technology itself is so imperative. So like if you're not partnered with someone that has a clear understanding of the requirements, and then they're not facilitating the conversations with like OGC to explain to them, we need to own X, Y, and Z. So then OGC can then tell you, all right, well, use the data rights clause general and specifically tell them that you want to own this and use this alternative and things like that. You're not going to be, your post award is not going to be successful. We can, if we take that time up front to really problem solve and understand the outline of what it is we're trying to buy, it really allows your team to be successful in the post award, which I think is really important. And that's kind of something that I try to, especially in technology, I'm not talking about taking 2 years to figure out your problem. I'm talking about taking it and breaking it down into a smaller chunk so it's a little bit easier to digest, a little bit less risk. And so like here at DOL was a perfect example. They had, I think you all did what, 3 bots? Mm-hmm. Like to really get your appetite of, is this going to work? What are the lessons learned here? And then they can go out, I'm assuming in the future, to figure out how to even do a bigger buy for these types of needs in the future, because it is an emerging technology. Don't feel like you have to chew the whole apple at once. Take that first bite to see if it really works. And having retrospectives and understanding of the problem, what worked, what didn't work, it's really important.
Yeah, no, and I think you're right. So can you talk at a little bit of a more general level, right? Because we did this process at at DOL, and you're right, like we leveraged DOL's really great contracting staff to be able to do this. But for folks who maybe are still kind of struggling with, all right, well, how do we get from problem to solution, right? You've talked a lot about this cross-functional team to be able to figure out what is the problem that we can solve. Can you talk about kind of what is the process, right, that you as a contracting officer think through, right, when COE does support on the buys to get from, all right, we have this problem defined now, how do we buy this in a strategic and smart way that is rapid, right? So it's not 2 years in the future.
Yeah, that's a really great question. For me, I've said it several times already. I start with defining the problem, but after that, once we've defined the problem, we really need to work with our users to understand if that's really what the need is. And then once you work with those users to figure out if that's what your need is. And I saw a question, I did sneak a little, I did look at the question, and they're asking about customer experience. And that's exactly where customer experience comes into play. We need to have a clear understanding of how is it that these solutions are going to help or hurt them in the future. And so having a clear understanding of what the problem is and how they need to solve it, as Krista said, she's a technologist. She's not the user of the bot. That was Ryan's team. So she worked hand in hand with Ryan's team to understand what it is that they were trying to do. After that, we draft our requirements, try to understand specifically the objectives that you're doing. And technology specifically, if I was buying RPA, I would use something like a SOO, which is a statement of objectives, understanding clearly that the government doesn't know how to problem solve here and that we need a little help. So I would write out my objectives in a high level enough way that industry would have a clear understanding of what the need is and that they could respond to it. And the key piece here that's so important to get industry buy-in from my perspective is doing a draft RFQ. A draft RFQ is a tool in your tool belt that is so important because it allows you the opportunity to engage with industry in a way for market research purposes to understand if there's people who can solve the problem, understand the problem that we're asking, and also maybe even help you identify the cost of what the problem might be. Like I said earlier, as someone in government, you might not know what the cost is, and it's really important to understand and do that part within the market research piece. And then from there, having a successful evaluation. An evaluation that focuses not only on the technical skills, but the soft skills that you're going to be looking for is going to be imperative. That means having a team that can show you and not like actually giving you that meat of how they've done it before, not just tell you, is going to be imperative by either doing like a technical challenge, a demo, or something like that, depending on if you're procuring a product or a service. And then after the evaluation, successfully getting to award, that post-award, that kickoff, being clear with your agent, your industry partner that what it is you're trying to solve and the parameters around it are so important. Having clear set ways of seeing continuous delivery and having that built into your contracts is so important. That's why when people say, well, we're agile. Well, if you're agile, is your contract allowing you to have agile expertise incorporated into it? Are you asking for them to have a backlog, continuous like development? You're not able to have, you have to have those types of parameters in your deliverables or your costs, depending on what you're doing, so that you can allow for your teams to see something being delivered continuously and not just handed to you at the end of the day or at the end of the contract. I heard a horror story one day where someone entered into like a $30 million contract for some type of solution. At the end of the 18-month period performance or this 12-month period performance, the industry partner handed a CD-ROM to them, but it was really supposed to be a database or something like that.
Oh man, that made my heart just drop.
Can you imagine being a part? It's one of those stories that you hear and you're like, that's not true. The reality is it is true. They didn't, because they weren't showing their continuous delivery. So you need to set your industry partner up and the government up for success to have those check-ins. And so one of the things that I also like to do with technology specifically is having a contract type that allows a little bit more flexibility. I'm a big believer in labor hour contracts because it allows for you to have the scaling or descaling based off of how they're delivering. And then also if you need to change course based off of the delivery, if like I need more people who are front-end developers versus back-end developers, or people who are helping you with human-centered design, it gives you a little bit more flexibility. It's just a matter of going through that process, the step-by-step, define your problem, draft your objectives, draft statement of RFQ, a successful evaluation of not only just like telling me, but showing me, and then the post-award management.
Yeah. Well, so that was great. Thank you very much. So that wraps up all the questions that I have planned for you, Michelle. So I would like to open it up to the audience for Q&A specifically for Michelle. I do see a question here. I think it's a great question. So I'm going to ask you, Michelle, but I'm also going to save this question for Ryan. What are the biggest barriers to RPA adoption? And so I think, Michelle, you can bring kind of your acquisition perspective to the answer to this question.
Yeah, so for me, the biggest barrier is just folks realizing that it's a commercial product, right? RPAs, a lot of folks get this mindset that emerging technology has to be procured not commercially, and then they use like the FAR sections that don't allow a little bit more flexibility or streamlining. And so for me, the biggest barrier that I've seen with emerging technologies is not to use existing streamlined procedures. I'd also be interested in what Ryan has to say as an acquisition professional, especially someone who's already adopted this type of thing in their environment. I don't know if Ryan, if he's there or not, but I'll put him on the spot if he is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think for us, the biggest challenge with adopting RPA and the 3 bots that we developed with the Centers of Excellence, we live in a very prescriptive world in procurement where folks are used to, okay, this is the way you do it. We live in this box, FAR-based, everything is, this is how I did it last year. This is how I did it maybe 20 years ago. And just really trying to get our user base acclimated to the tools and being open to new ways of doing something that they've done dozens, hundreds of times over the years. That's been a big challenge for us. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when Krista has some questions for me. But first and foremost, I think that's been the biggest challenge with the user community.
That's a really good piece, Ryan. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, why have I not talked about the change management aspect of like acquisitions? You're right. What happens with acquisitions, folks, and I'm guilty of it too. I feel like our first inclination of when something's new, you're like, no, can't do that. And reality is you can try to start being a yes person and figure out there is the FAR 1 specifically says in FAR section 1 that if it's not in here, use your innovative opportunities to figure out a solution. It doesn't say it specifically, but it's in there. They use the word innovative. They say that if it's not specifically written in black and white that it's not allowed, it means it is allowed. So following, I don't want to say that gray area because it's not gray. It literally, if it's not in black and white, it means it's allowed. So finding those ways that allow for you to be a little bit more open and understanding that technology changes rapidly and you have to keep up with those changes of not only how we're procuring itself, but also like the items. Like how I would procure janitorial services is completely different on how I would procure emerging technologies. And I think some people think they would do it the same way. And that is a little worrisome.
Yeah. All right. Well, excellent discussion. Thank you both. So we do have another question, and I don't think, Michelle, you're going to have the answer to this. So we may save this question till the end. But the question is, do you have any recommendations for automated process discovery tools that can be used to capture and analyze existing processes before automation? So again, from your acquisition lens.
And I would say my answer is this is where it's perfect to have that cross-functional team of individuals. I would say, Krista, what is the answer to this? So,
yeah. And I will answer it after we talk to Ryan. So are there any final questions for Michelle? Because I definitely want to be mindful of time. All right. So Ryan, you're in the hot seat now, and I'm just so excited about this. So can you maybe give us a little bit of background, right? Why did your team say, yes, we volunteer as tribute to explore RPA, and we wanted to engage with the Centers of Excellence to do it?
Yeah, so I would say a little bit over a year ago, we saw just a need at DOL. We had an interest in emerging technologies. I think eventually that interest will lead us to AI, but right now we sort of saw automation as the entry to those sorts of emerging technologies. And I think it really sort of comes down to an event like this, to be honest with you, where we're sharing lessons learned and products. And our senior procurement executives saw a demo of an RPA project from another agency, saw that and just got really excited. And I think that fire got lit in all of us when he shared that with us, to let us know that these are out there, and this is not some pie in the sky sci-fi future 20 years from now thing. This is something that we can do now. And then couple that with sort of the mandate, from the president's management agenda and the cross-agency priority goals to shift from low value to high value work. And I hate the phrasing of that. I like to think that everything we do in procurement is high value. But I think really at the heart of that, what we're talking about is, while there are certainly complicated, there are tasks where you have to have deep procurement knowledge. And then there are other tasks that they're not unimportant, but they're certainly more rote and just sort of going through very clear delineated steps. And so if we can free our folks up from those sorts of tasks, those rote, repetitive tasks, we can then shift their efforts and their areas of focus to those parts of their job where they're uniquely qualified to perform them. We spend a ton of money on training and the experience and just everything that it takes to be a quality acquisition professional. We should be using those skills instead of, hey, go to this website, click here, okay, copy and paste that into here. That doesn't require any specific 1102, any specific contracting officer knowledge to do that. And so we saw it as a real opportunity for us at Labor to take some of those rote tasks and see if we can't leverage RPA. And so I think, for us, we started with the responsibility determination bot. That's a task that we have to perform every time we make an award, but it generally, collecting the information to make that determination is pretty basic. You're going to this website, you're going to that website, and then pulling that information together to make your responsibility determination. And so for us, it was sort of that was our gateway. And then we saw an opportunity to not just do the one bot for contractor responsibility, but then to also leverage our relationship with the Centers of Excellence, and then the contractor that came on board to do some of the work for us, to then do 3 bots.
Yeah, so that's great. And we are going to actually show the demo of the contractor responsibility determination bot that we got to. But I want to talk a little bit more about, tell us about your automations a little bit, and I'm happy to dive in too, because I was also very steeped in this process, and maybe just a little bit about who had to be involved in getting these bots built, because I know, wearing my technology hat, I always say, I'm a technologist. I don't know your job. I can't give you something meaningful if you don't tell me what you need, right? So can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. it was so key to our success with these projects to have sort of those cross-functional teams where we had folks like me who, I'm a contracting professional. I know FAR, I know regulation. Having folks like that on the team, it was sort of unusual for us, but we were the program office, and then helping flesh that team out. Then we had the Centers of Excellence. We had Krista, who without her, we would certainly not have the bots or have seen the success that we had. To then provide that technical know-how, just as Krista is a technologist and I'm an acquisition professional, I don't know hardly anything about emerging technologies, and really being able to have someone on the team to be able to flesh out those areas that we don't know, the technical side of it, while we can flesh out sort of the requirements development piece of it, what we actually want the bot to do. And then of course the sort of the third leg to that stool would be the contractor who actually did the configuration work for us, to actually do the sort of nuts and bolts build out of the bot. But having members from all of those sort of disparate teams come together on this project, you couldn't do it if you took any one of those out, there's no way that you could do the kind of projects that we did. And it's so key to recognize that early. And I think we did, which was great. But then that's sort of the development piece, but then implementation, I also, I don't know whether this is getting outside of the scope of your question, Krista, but I think it's also really important to include your users as part of the team as well, right? I mean, I could tell them exactly what needs to happen from a policy perspective or a regulation perspective, that if the bot does this, then we will, we'll have the product we want. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the input from your users to say, hey, this doesn't work, or I don't understand this, or I don't understand how this plays with existing policy or regulation, keeping that sort of user-centered design in mind during both the design process and then the rollout and the change management piece there, to include them as a member of the team too. And I think one of the lessons learned for us is getting them involved more from the start. I think we definitely saw that as a need when we got down to testing and things like that. But in hindsight, if I could do it over again, I would have had a representative or two from our operational contracting teams from the word go on these projects. And I think that sort of slowed us down, and we hit some speed bumps based on their not being involved. So that's definitely a lesson learned for us.
Yeah, so I think you touched on a couple of really good things there. So here's what I want to do. I want to show the demo of our final bot, and this is our bot as of today. It looks real. I think it looks really great. It is leveraging our brand new bot center, which is where the Department of Labor has centralized a lot of our bot capabilities. So it supports individual users to be able to easily and smoothly interact with the bots. However, after I show the demo, I'd really like to explore some of those speed bumps, because the demo you're going to see today was not the first iteration, right? And again, this is where I think, again, that experimentation and being willing to try things is really important. So we'll show you the final product, but I also want to talk about how we got there, because it did not happen overnight. It definitely happened with some blood, sweat, and tears. So I'm going to share my screen and show you the bot. There's no music, there's no voiceover. So we're going to have about 1.5 minutes of dead air. Please watch. We're going to try to make it as not awkward as possible. But what you're going to see is you're going to see somebody do the contractor responsibility determination. You're going to see them interact with the bot center, put in the requirements, right? All those fields that are required for the bot to process. And then you're going to see the bot rapid fire go through all of the steps that it goes through that used to have to happen by a human. All right, so let me share my screen. Can you see this?
You are not sharing.
Can you not? Oops. Here, let me pull this in. Sorry. Technical difficulties. I swear I'm a technologist. All right. Here we go. Here we go. Can you see this now?
Perfect.
All right. So you can see the person scroll down to their bot, contractor responsibility. And then they say run bot. They fill out all the required fields. And now the bot's running. It takes those inputs and is rapid fire going through everything it needs to do. You can see boxes popping up where it's specifically extracting information. It's taking that extracted information and populating a form. And it's actually interacting with an API, which is something you can't even see. And then it fills out the final form with all of the information that it's extracted from a number of different sites. It saves it. And then it emails all of the results to the user. So it's a pretty smooth process, and it actually takes less than 3 minutes for the bot to run. And this was actually a process that took a number of hours before. And this is processed by Ryan's whole team, which is well over 100 people, right? So you can imagine the number of hours spent processing this for every single time someone has to do a determination. So we're really seeing a lot of time savings, or the potential for a lot of time savings with this bot. But as I mentioned, it took us a while to get here, right? So Ryan, can you talk a little bit about maybe some of those speed bumps that we hit, and kind of how we worked through there to get to where we got?
Yeah, absolutely. So the very slick, polished interface that Krista just showed you there, what was definitely not the first iteration of these bots. Before I start, I think it's really important to know, I think DOL really saw this all as sort of a learning experience, and we had the sort of latitude to experiment and try without the pressure of thinking that we had to get it right first rattle out of the box. So the first iteration of the user interface involved an Excel spreadsheet where there were cells that the user was expected to pull up that spreadsheet. So they would have to have that somewhere, right? Whether that's housed on our intranet or on their own desktop or whatever. And they would populate those cells in the Excel spreadsheet, and then they would attach that to an email and then email a dedicated resource box for the bot. The bot would then take the Excel spreadsheet and do what you just saw there with all of the automation. What that turned out to result in for us was a lot of folks getting errors in filling out the spreadsheet, right? I mean, we're so close to the problem when we're developing it. I don't think we really saw that being a problem or a speed bump for us with folks filling out those spreadsheets and attaching them. Turns out it was. Turns out that was an actual issue for our users. Formatting, hyphens, spaces, all of that, and then attaching it. Do they need to put text in? Just getting a lot of questions. By and large, they were able to submit the requests. I think that it just wasn't abundantly intuitive to the user community how to do it. Whereas what you just saw there with the bot center, that looks like one of any website that our user base might use on a regular basis in their personal life or with other professional duties. And so really taking that feedback from the community, and that's another thing, you don't want to just toss the product over the fence and say, okay, here's your bot, start using it. Keeping that engagement open, keeping those lines of communication open, enabled us to get that feedback and say, okay, well, our utilization numbers might be low. Why is that? And then talking to the user community to find out that they don't understand it. They don't understand the interface. They don't really understand how to submit the request. And so then taking that feedback as a lesson learned to then build out the bot center that Krista just showed there with the very slick interface. So that was one of the lessons learned. Another one that I wanted to touch on involves sort of requirements development and understanding all of the various systems that you're asking this bot to touch. One of the bots that we built out, we call it the letter of intent bot now. And for those of you that might not know, in the federal procurement world, we generally have sort of a base period of performance with a number of option years in the out years where we can exercise those options at the unilateral discretion of the government. But part of that process involves us telling the contractor that, yes, we would like to continue to engage their services moving forward into the new option year. There's a contractually delineated timeline for that. Typically it's 60 days, but it can vary. And that's what the bot is today. So the bot will look at expiring contracts or contracts whose periods of performance are ending and let us know whether ask us whether we want to exercise the option, and then it will go out and generate some of the paperwork involved in that process. That is what the bot is today. Originally, what we thought that bot was going to be was an exercise of options bot that would go out and touch our contract writing system, or we call it AMS, Acquisition Management System, and it would access our system to do the clicks necessary to sort of generate that draft modification to exercise the option. Technically, from a technical perspective, it was possible, right? We could do the clicks in the system. We got the authority to be able to go into the system. From a technical perspective, it was not a problem. What we didn't realize, and again, I think that this goes back to getting your users involved earlier on in the process, was the quality of the data that existed from our requisitions. Those are human inputs. The data is not reliable to the extent that we could completely automate it, right? I mean, even if it was reliable to the tune of, say, 90% or 95%, you just can't have the bot go out there for those 5 or 10% where the requisition information coming from the program office was not accurate. And so when we got into testing and we then involved our users, they said, well, I mean, we really kind of have to look at these numbers because our program offices are not acquisition professionals to the extent that we are. And we have to look at these to see if these are the right numbers coming in, the right data attached to that requisition. And once you involve sort of human decision making, then you've sort of derailed the bot, right? You've got an issue with that. So that's another lesson learned, really understanding your data sources. Are they reliable? Understanding how if you're going to utilize another system, if you're going to touch on another system, understanding how humans do it in the real world, right? Is there sort of a cognitive piece there that the human being is saying, oh no, hey, this is unreasonable. This says the period of performance ends in 1947. Okay, well, we would look at that and say, hey, that's not accurate, right? Like that's not right. But the bot would just take that, plug it in, and run with it. So understanding the systems, the data that you have, understanding how your users interact with those systems, that all turned out to be very important. And then last, before I keep prattling on, I would just say then from that is also a lesson learned, right? Not being afraid to pivot, to take what we thought, oh, okay, wow, this is a problem, right? What we originally thought was going to work with this bot, giving yourself permission to pivot and say, okay, well, it's not going to do what we wanted it to do, but how can we utilize this to still generate value? And that's what we did with the letter of intent generation bot. I mean, there's still significant risk associated with missing a letter of intent that opens the contract up to renegotiation to exercise that option. There are things, there is a problem there. And so giving yourself permission to pivot from maybe a dead end into still deriving value from the project.
Yeah, no, I think you raised some really good points there. And this is something that I really like to drive home, right? Technology is not necessarily the solution to the problem, right? A lot of this depends on processes, and your existing process as a human performs it, right? It may not be suitable for automation through technology. So that requires either changing the process or involving, again, your end users to figure out how can we get a bot that's actually going to be able to solve the problem, because automating bad processes doesn't help anyone, right? And some processes just can't be automated because the way they're structured right now requires too many different human inputs. So I think that actually gets to one of our very first questions from the audience, which is, what are some of the biggest barriers to RPA adoption, right? I think we heard, right, getting your end users involved, right? Because you can't build technology that people can't use. I think that means making sure your data sources are actually automatable, right? And are filled with data that can be leveraged by an automated process, right? Because if it requires any kind of discerning or decision making, maybe you can't, right? And then I think that there's the change management, right? And we've been working through this, Ryan, right? Just because you build a bot doesn't mean folks will use it, especially if it's hard to use, right? So there's a lot of training, and there's a lot of kind of, I think, buy-in from the users and from users leadership to say, we've built this bot, you need to use it, right? Because you can't force people to do anything, right?
Yeah, it's definitely not a field of dreams situation, as it turns out. You can't just build the bot and expect people to use it. But I will say, I think the biggest barrier is that initial adoption. We have a couple of users who use it all the time, right? Because they got in there and they realized, hey, this is something I like. This does generate value for me. This frees up some of my day to utilize the bot. We have lower utilization numbers across the board, but I think that's largely a function of folks not using it in the first place. So if you can just get over that first hump, if you can get folks to use it, a handful of times, they're going to see the value, right? I mean, everybody is so busy. I mean, we're just in such a resource constrained environment. If you can get folks to use it once and say, wow, that used to take me 2 hours, and now it's 3 minutes of time that I don't even have to pay attention or do anything while the computer's doing its thing. People see the value. It's just a matter of getting them to that point in the process to say, okay, use it a couple of times and you'll see.
Yep. All right. So our next question is, again, it's about recommendations for tools that can be used to capture and analyze existing processes before automating. So I'll take this one. I am not a salesperson for any one company, so I cannot speak for the entire marketplace. So I think that there's a couple of factors for evaluating existing processes. So one, we've already talked about, you have to have your end users, right? Like if you don't know the process, you need to get the process owners. And then I think there needs to be somebody with that technical know-how, right? There needs to be some human-centered design. You need to have that business analyst role to really be asking the hard questions. In terms of tools, there definitely are some tools in the marketplace that will help do screen captures and whatnot. We use UiPath at DOL, though we are looking at exploring other technologies. I think they have a tool. We haven't used it widely, but it is something that we're getting requests for. So there are tools. We haven't used them widely as we're building our program, but they're certainly, I think, worth exploring as you mature your RPA operation. I don't know if Ryan or Michelle, you have comments on that. So the next question is, what are your thoughts around taking an enterprise view of RPA to maximize the technology's impact? So again, I will answer this, but I welcome Michelle and Ryan's thoughts on this. So the answer is yes, we should absolutely do that. And that's actually what we have done here at the Department of Labor. We use these 3 bots and all of these lessons learned to actually create a central infrastructure with our orchestrator, with a streamlined process for intake and evaluation of processes, evaluation of bots, evaluations of data systems, to be able to quickly and efficiently evaluate what are processes that can be automated and benefited from automation. And then we actually have a centralized development space that folks can leverage to be able to build out their bots and deploy them quickly. So yes, centralizing is absolutely something that is incredibly helpful. And actually, we've built our infrastructure to be able to maximize and optimize our utilization of our cloud space, right? So we're not only using bots to optimize our spending at DOL. We also built our bot infrastructure to maximize savings for our cloud and infrastructure costs as well. So the takeaway from that is enterprise capability is where you want to be moving towards. But what I'll say is it takes time to get there, right? You don't go from zero to enterprise capability overnight. And I think, again, Ryan's team has been incredibly gracious and patient with us, being able to say, all right, we'll be the first to test out bots. Now we'll be the ones to test out your enterprise capability. And right, we've already seen folks raising their hand to say, well, what about this process that we do? Well, what about that process that we do? Right. So it's really a growing process and showing incremental value piece by piece. And I think we're there, right? I would say we're moving up in the maturity level at DOL to be able to support an entire enterprise of bots. I don't know, Ryan or Michelle, did you want to add anything there?
I was just going to speak to the fact about the data that both you and Ryan had already hit on. My biggest lesson learned listening to colleagues and people who have more experience than I do when it comes to data, having that infrastructure of collecting and having usable data is just so important. So like Krista was saying, what they're doing at DOL is the smart way of handling it, because you have to have good data to be able to implement these types of technologies.
All right, so our next question is, what recommendations do you have for the deployment of successful RPA? Industry depicts the failure rate of RPA deployments at or near 50%. What can government organizations do to avoid these failure rates? So I think we talked a little bit about this with some of Ryan's lessons learned. So I almost want to spin the question a little bit and say, right, when we're partnering with our vendors who are helping us, how can vendors ensure that that the tools that they're building are able to be adopted? So Ryan, you want to start?
Yeah, so for us, I think it was pretty clear that the contractor, I mean, what they do is they build bots, right? And so for them, it was just a very clear cut, hey, we need this input, hey, we need that input. And they got those inputs and then they built it and then kind of walked away. I think if I were to do it over again and maybe increase the sort of success rate across the board, it would cost more, right? Because you would have them involved. There'd be more time associated, but having them involved during sort of that those earlier stages to fully understand what they're doing, what they're building, what business need is being met by the bot, as opposed to just sort of the clear cut, okay, this input leads to that output, and involving them earlier to help them understand the business process. I did not get that impression, and maybe Krista, you can talk to it a little bit, that they fully understood the business need. They just saw the requirement that we developed and said, okay, we can build that. I do think that it would have been more successful, and that's not to say that it's not been successful, but I think it would have been more successful if they had a more complete picture of the business need and what we were trying to solve.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Michelle, I don't know if you wanted to add there.
No, I don't. I think the success and failure goes back to, for me, like the cross-functional team. Like you were fortunate at DOL because I know you had such an involvement from your CIO and your CISO, or those folks who understood and the importance of making it operational. I think like if a program office wanted to take these initiatives on by themselves and not already engage with trying to figure out how to get them the authority to operate once they're developed, they become almost kind of useless in a sense, because you can't have that. They're not in your system working. So the only lesson learned and the thing that I think would allow for more success is bringing in all the parties in the beginning to really truly make the bot truly operational.
Yeah.
And we were really lucky at DOL to have executive buy-in from both the tech side of things with our CIO, and then my boss, the senior procurement executive, to have that sort of executive level buy-in from Jump Street. So it's not something that we were just developing in a vacuum, hoping that we're able to deploy it. And that was always sort of understood that we had the backing to be able to do that. And I think that was really important to the success that we saw.
Yeah, I think you're right. I remember sitting down with some of those executives, and on the first day, I said, we're going to do an RPA project. And some leadership looked me dead in the eye and said, what is RPA? But you know what? They were on board, and they said, I don't know what this is, but I'm going to dedicate someone to this, and we're going to get it figured out. And they did, and it was really great. All right, so next question I think is probably a quick one. How many RPA bots are in operation at GSA and at DOL? So at DOL, as I said, we are less than a year and a half into our endeavor. So we're still at less than 10 bots, but we have our enterprise capability ready to go. So our goal over the next year is to increase that number significantly. I don't know if Michelle, you can talk to GSA's numbers.
I wish I had more of a concrete answer about the numbers at GSA. I know there's several bots in our ecosystem. I'm just not sure the exact number.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think that the RPA efforts at GSA are happening in a different place than where you sit, right? They are housed within GSA's,
yes,
right? Whereas
exactly.
we focus externally.
My focus is on the external agencies. So unfortunately, I don't have an internal understanding of, I know that we have bots, we've used them in our own contracting space. It's just a matter of how many we actually have, but I'm just not sure.
Yeah. All right. So I think we've got time for one more question. Is GSA examining agency examples such as DOL for use at GSA and more broadly to make them available to other agencies, especially for functions such as acquisitions noted that are universal across federal agencies?
I mean, that's a really good question. Unfortunately, I don't have a response for it because I can't speak for the agency as a whole in our RPA efforts. I know that it is, as an emerging technology, as an agency that is trying to buy things or do things that affect the larger government-wide systems, I'm assuming it's there. One of a great example of a bot that is available for use of all agencies is MRAS, which is a market research bot that was created that allows contracting professionals to quickly identify vendors on GSA schedules of who can buy for specific products, and they can also help you with your RFI process. So that is a free bot that GSA offers that any agency could use. So we're definitely, I know that there's several initiatives to not only create bots that agencies can use, but also ways that we could leverage it. I just don't know the specifics around it. But if you're interested in the MRAS tool, I definitely suggest it if you're a contracting professional.
Yep. All right, well, that is all we have time for. Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you so much, Ryan. I think this has been really insightful. Nicole, I will pass it back to you.
Yeah, sure. So like she said, this is about all the time that we have for today, but do you guys, panelists or moderator, have any last thoughts you want to leave with the audience before we do wrap things up?
I would just say, right, I think RPA is it's a really powerful technology if it's done right. So don't be afraid to experiment and explore and see where it's a capability, but also know that you may fail. There's going to be some bumps along the way, and that's okay, right? It's about failing fast and learning from those lessons to really be able to get to a place where you have an RPA enabled workforce that actually has bots that do what they're supposed to do.
Awesome.
That would be my advice too, Krista, is just failing fast, understanding that you should not try to conquer all of it at once, and doing a small iteration to figure out your success is the best way to do it.
I would agree. Start small and then scale up. I am extraordinarily confident that whatever we end up doing from here, and this, these are certainly not the only 3 bots that procurement at DOL will have, and so the next one will be all the more successful based on these sort of small process bots that we've generated. So start small and scale up, because it's it's a big world out there and a lot of possibility associated with these technologies, particularly selfishly for procurement.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. And thank everyone else for attending today. It's been a great session. And I want to thank our panelists and moderator for their extremely insightful webinar discussion. Hopefully you guys will all join us at our next webinar on May 5th. It'll be RPA, state and local government. More details will be sent to you guys, everyone that was registered for this event later on. But everyone have a great rest of your week.